The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A new source from within the U.S. intelligence community has leaked a huge set of documents that relate to drone killings done by the United States. The same team that released the Edward Snowden documents, Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, and Jeremy Scahill from The Intercept, are responsible for this release of documents. And here are the highlights from someone that is being sort of nicknamed the new Edward Snowden. A lot of the drone strikes were carried out based on unreliable intelligence. That's not going to surprise any of you. During a particular 5-month stretch of operations, 90% of those killed by the drones were not the intended targets. One strike killed 219 people, where 35 people were the so-called targets. And the files also describe in detail how many people are consulted before President Obama signs off on an order to kill someone with a drone. And this is a very different type of leak, Lewis, because much of what is happening here is not really surprising to many. It corresponds and corroborates the bits and pieces that have been released about the U.S. drone program over the last couple of years, but it is a new leak of information that confirms much of what we suspected regarding the drone program. And we heard stories of a lot of this. An Afghani farmer who was out in what is common, the night tending of crops, and mistaken, apparently, for some kind of terrorist and killed, for example. This just corroborates all of the bits and pieces we already heard.
That's true, but I guess when you have more examples of it, then it's harder to dismiss for the people who say that, the drone program is a good thing, or if you support drones in general.
Yeah, and we've been using drones to blow people up with little evidence. That won't come as a surprise to many people. And what has been confirmed beyond any doubt by these documents is that the entire process and collateral damage that is happening seems to be acceptable to those at the top of the chain of command. We will ultimately see, Lewis, what happens to the so-called new Edward Snowden. Already talk of what might happen here. And as we've seen with Edward Snowden, as we've seen with Chelsea Manning, very different types of documents leaked, very different scenarios with regard to exposing legal activity, but arguably unconstitutional by some, versus other types of illegal activity. We don't know what is ultimately going to happen to this leaker, if anything.
Yeah, it could be a group effort. Still, in a case like that, it might only be one person who takes the fall. So we'll see. I'm very curious about this.
A pro-life Republican impregnated a sex worker and then begged her to have an abortion. I'm speaking of none other than Louisiana State Senator David Vitter, who is staunchly pro-life. He impregnated a former sex worker and pressed her to get an abortion when he found out that she was pregnant. This shocking claim was made in an interview conducted by Jason Bradbury with Wendy Ellis, who is indeed a former sex worker. She told the world about David Vitter, known to some as Diaper Dave. He had this interest of wearing baby diapers that was revealed in 2007. And now we know about this insanely hypocritical action after he recently introduced the Women's Health and Public Safety Act, which would allow states to exclude abortion providers from receiving any Medicaid funding. Didn't stop him, Lewis, from begging the woman he impregnated out of God-given, traditional, biblical, natural marriage to have an abortion. Here's the interview with Wendy Ellis, where she explains what happened.
What happens at the end, towards the end of the relationship? What caused the relationship to end?
I found out I was pregnant, and he had asked me very plainly, am I the father? And I kind of flipped out on him because he's the only person I had been sleeping with. And when I was asked to have an abortion, it kind of threw me.
Who asked you to have the abortion?
He did.
So you weren't having sex with anyone else at the time?
No.
Not a boyfriend or anyone
No.
else? And so At what point did you guys stop having unprotected sex?
Oh, goodness, when I moved into the house across the street.
And did he request that, or did you?
What, of the unprotected sex?
Yeah.
It just happened.
So it wasn't a conscious decision. It was just
Right, it just kind of happened.
a passionate moment.
Right.
So you approached him and told him you were pregnant at how far into the pregnancy?
I was 16 weeks pregnant when I found out,
Okay.
which is I was 4 months pregnant. And him and I quit seeing each other when I was 6 months pregnant.
And that was his decision to quit seeing you?
Correct.
What happened at that point?
I just, I knew that if I had the baby, that the life for the child and myself would be completely unmanageable. We would never live a normal life. And so at 8 months, I decided to give the baby up for adoption and never speak of it again.
It was found that David Vitter was also on the client list of an infamous DC madam. He's pro-life when it comes to other people. He's pro-life when it comes to the government not being involved in any abortions. He's pro-life when it helps him raise money or is otherwise convenient. But when the sex worker he's having sex with gets pregnant, all of a sudden he's a very pro-choice guy, Lewis, although not really. He's in favor of apparently the man deciding whether the woman has an abortion.
Yeah, and I think in his case, it would have been just as easy to say, okay, you can just give the kid up for adoption. Let's not speak of this at all. But he was really adamant, Dave, about eliminating all of the evidence.
Well, it turned out, as we heard from Ms. Davis, that she also didn't want the attention she anticipated she would get from this. So there was actually no real reason for David Vitter to start begging her to have the abortion, a medical procedure that he claims to so adamantly oppose. But you're right, he was probably in the mindset of, we've got to make this go away, put my religious convictions aside, put my public political statements aside, put it all aside, because now I'm in the position where I need someone to have an abortion. My morals aside, my ethics aside, let's get that abortion done immediately.
Because this was it. This was the big one. This would expose him. And, well, I'm really glad that she came out ultimately and decided to tell this story.
Toddlers are shooting people every week this year so far. The Washington Post wrote about a 2-year-old in South Carolina who found a gun in the backseat of the car he was riding in and accidentally shot his grandmother, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. This type of thing happens from time to time. Little kid finds a gun, apparently good kid with a gun, I don't know, fires it, and hurts or kills himself, herself, or someone else. A lot of the cases rarely bubble up to the national level, except when someone like the parent ends up dead. But the toddler shootings are happening a lot more frequently than you might think. Washington Post spent a few hours sifting through news reports. They found 43 instances of somebody being shot by a toddler 3 or younger in 2015 so far. Now, sometimes the person shot was the toddler themselves. In 31 of the 43 cases, a toddler found a gun and shot him or herself. In 2015 so far, 13 toddlers have killed themselves with firearms. 18 toddlers have injured themselves. 10 have injured other people. And 2 toddlers have killed other people with guns. About once a week on average, Lewis, a toddler finds a gun and shoots someone, either themselves or an adult or another kid in some cases.
Yeah, it seems like in a lot of cases, there's someone who has a gun in their purse and the purse is put next to the child. Okay, you can fill in the rest of the details.
Or last week's story, or the week before, where it was a kid, an 11-year-old, went inside the house and knew where the gun was, brought it out and shot an 8-year-old because the 8-year-old wouldn't show him her puppy or something like that.
Yeah, I think that there really are no accidents when this type of thing happens, because there are 100 ways that you can make absolutely sure with 100% certainty that a child in your home or in your car will not be able to fire one of your weapons. If you allow this to happen, it's complete negligence, and it's stupidity.
Some demographic information: boy toddlers are much more likely than girl toddlers to be the bad kid with the gun firing guns. As far as location goes, shootings by toddlers are concentrated particularly in the south and southeast of the United States, but toddler shootings have happened in 24 different states so far in 2015. Interestingly, California, the state with the highest population, hasn't had a single one, and nobody in New England has been shot by a toddler. But of course, gun safety laws, Lewis, have no bearing at all on gun safety.
Well, sometimes they don't when people ignore those laws, right, Dave?
Right, yeah. The numbers are probably an undercount also, because many of these toddlers shooting other people or themselves incidents might result in minor injuries or no injuries at all, and thus we don't even hear about it in the media. So this is based on the stories that have made it to media outlets. We have a toddler a week shooting themselves or someone else. What a country we live in, Lewis.
Yeah, just think of all the times that there was a kid holding a gun ready to go off, but it didn't. Or all the times they managed to fire a gun and it didn't hit anyone or anything. And it's just crazy, Dave. We have to worry about getting shot by toddlers.
It's quite fascinating and compelling for any number of reasons that we've gone into time after time. We're back from Las Vegas. On the bonus show today, I will give you all of the trials and tribulations and interesting stories from that conference. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Follow producer Lewis on Twitter at LewisMotomedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today's new member of the day is Dustin Nichols. And Dustin, as you know, is the main reason that our program continues to grow and expand, which is the membership program. You can read about it and sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's bonus show is going to be really good. I have so many great behind-the-scenes stories from the Democratic debate and the Vegas conference I was at and so many other things. This Friday, we are going to be doing a 2-hour membership special. We've done this twice before, and what we do is we send out an email. It's going to go out at 2 p.m. Eastern on Friday to everybody on our mailing list. You can sign up for the mailing list at davidpakman.com. There will be a 2-hour window where you can get a very, very discounted David Pakman Show membership. It's available for 2 hours, and that's it. And it is a great deal. Every time we do it, people go crazy, Lewis. People start destroying their computers in elation because of how great of a deal this membership special is. After they sign up, obviously, they destroy the computer. It'd be crazy to do it before. All you have to do is go to davidpakman.com and sign up for the mailing list. And Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern, you'll get an email about the big special. Okay, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can support the work we do by going to davidpakman.com/Amazon. It'll redirect you to Amazon, and you'll see your browser will say amazon.com/David Pakman Show, a little code. Bookmark that link and use it whenever you shop. Lewis, many people buying Star Wars DVDs in advance of the new Star Wars movie that is going to be coming out. Are you excited for the new Star Wars film, or are your expectations low?
Cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the director, but we'll see, Dave. I'm a little hopeful.
Also, a couple of purchases for bulk clown noses through our Amazon link. What kind of interesting party are you throwing, Lewis, that you need to buy a 250 count package of clown noses? I would love to hear more about that from whoever bought those.
Yeah, it could be some event where you have a bunch of kids and there's makeup, and a lot of kids are afraid of clowns, though. So
yeah, increasingly. I know adults who are afraid of clowns and mimes, actually.
Yeah, I know one that's afraid of clowns, and it's Bob. Actually, you know Bob.
Of course, I saw him yesterday, in fact.
Nice.
davidpakman.com/Amazon. If you ever shop on Amazon, why not take a little bit of your purchase away from Amazon and send it to the David Pakman Show, davidpakman.com/Amazon. Okay, a Republican presidential candidate, Jeb Bush, employed some really embarrassing contortionist moves over the weekend to explain how he could possibly blame Hillary Clinton for the attacks in Benghazi while simultaneously insisting that George W. Bush, his brother, was blameless for the September 11th, 2001 attacks. This started last week when Donald Trump was interviewed by Bloomberg, and he said, listen, George W. Bush was president during 9/11. Blame him, don't blame him. He was president. So this led to Jeb Bush responding to Donald Trump, saying he's pathetic. And then he was asked by Jake Tapper on CNN, how can you say Hillary's to blame for Benghazi, but Bush isn't at all to blame for 9/11? And here's Jeb Bush's answer. I've watched this 4 times, Lewis. I don't know what the hell is going on. I don't understand the explanation. Maybe you can figure it out. Let's look.
So what are you objecting to about Mr. Trump's remarks about 9/11 and your brother?
Look, my brother responded to a crisis, and he did it as you would hope a president would do. He united the country, he organized our country, and he kept us safe. And there's no denying that. The great majority of Americans believe that, and I don't know why he keeps bringing this up. It doesn't show that he's a serious person as it relates to being commander-in-chief and being the architect of a foreign policy. Across the spectrum of foreign policy, Mr. Trump talks about things that as though he's still on The Apprentice. I mean, literally talking about Syria, saying ISIS should take out Assad, then Russia should take out ISIS, as though it was some kind of board game and not a serious approach. This is just another example of the lack of seriousness, and this is a serious time. We're under grave threats again, and I think we need a president with a steady hand.
To play devil's advocate, do you think it's at all possible that your loyalty to your brother, while very admirable on a personal level, might be in some ways a political or policy liability, blinding you to mistakes he made?
No, I mean, so next week, Mr. Trump is probably going to say that FDR was around when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. It's what you do after that matters, and that's the sign of leadership. It's not does anybody actually blame my brother for the attacks on 9/11? If they do, they're totally marginalized in our society. It's what he did afterwards that mattered, and I'm proud of him, and so are a bunch of other people. You don't have to have your last name named Bush to be able to understand that. And it just calls into question Mr. Trump's credibility as a commander-in-chief and an architect of the next generation foreign policy, which we desperately need in this country right now.
Obviously, Al-Qaeda was responsible for the terrorist attack of 9/11. But how do you respond to critics who ask, if your brother and his administration bear no responsibility at all, how do you then make the jump that President Obama and Secretary Clinton are responsible for what happened at Benghazi?
Well, it's the question on Benghazi, which is hopefully we'll now finally get the truth to, is was the place secure? They had a responsibility in the Department of State to have proper security. There were calls for security. It looks like they didn't get it. And how was the response in the aftermath of the attack? Was there a chance that these 4 American lives could have been saved?
Yeah, Jeb Bush appears to be in like a total fantasy world with regard to his brother's legacy and a basic understanding of logic. Bush didn't do 9/11, but if only the terrorists are responsible for 9/11, then only the attackers are responsible for Benghazi, right?
Yeah, I think that would make sense. Maybe 9/11 would have happened anyway. When Tapper says mistakes that were made when it comes to the Bush administration, I don't think he's just talking about, the 9/11 attacks. I think we're talking about everything that happened afterwards. And of course, Jeb does not want to touch that because most Americans agree that mistakes were made.
Well, that's the funny thing. The defenders of George W. Bush's national security record usually say, well, from September 12th on, it was a great administration with regard to foreign policy and national security. That is also insane. It's insane to ignore 9/11, especially since we know that on August 6th, 2001, George W. Bush received a memo called Bin Laden Determined to Strike the United States, and he did essentially nothing, as we found out from Richard Clark. The record on foreign policy after 9/11 was also insane. Iraq. I mean, do I have to say anything other than Iraq?
Not just foreign policy, domestic policy as well.
Yeah.
Like we just talked about in the first clip. We have all of that going on, domestic spying, you name it, Dave.
I do agree with Jeb Bush on one thing, which is that Donald Trump talks about foreign policy like it's the board game Risk. That's actually a really astute observation from Jeb.
Yeah, I think that is a good one, yeah. But, there's no way Jeb can ever badmouth his brother. And Dave, if it were you, if it were your brother, could you badmouth your own brother? It's difficult.
It is tough. And, this is just yet another reason why we really shouldn't have siblings of former presidents be president, because then you have a situation where they may make decisions in relation to past decisions that their sibling or father or husband or whoever made that are sort of under the context of not undermining or implicitly criticizing something that was done. So many reasons why in a country of 330 million, we shouldn't have to keep going back to the same families for presidents. Let's talk about Republican presidential candidate Rand Paul. Last week, he made some insane comments saying that LGBT workers, whether you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, you should stay in the closet and not bring your private life to work. Tremendous outrage. And now he's trying to back the comment up. And his argument was, listen, if no one at work knows that you're gay, you won't be fired for being gay. Perfect solution, right? Well, a lot of people don't think so. And now Rand Paul has tried to re-explain the comments. Let's take a listen.
I don't think anybody should be fired for being gay. I do also, though, believe that your personal life should be personal and shouldn't affect anyone firing you. So I don't think the decision whether to hire or fire you should be based on things from your personal life. So when I say that it should remain in your house, yeah, I don't think it should be part of the decision-making of the business. So I might have been able to word it better, but I don't think it should enter into the decisions at all.
So how would you have worded it? Because the implication is, let's say you're gay, and your employees don't like the fact you're gay, so they fire you. Should that employee be allowed to go to court and sue? If you're an excellent employee, you haven't done anything wrong, the only thing the employer doesn't like is you're gay, shouldn't that employee have a right to go to court?
I don't think that anybody should be fired for being gay, and I don't think that their personal lives should enter into whether we hire or fire anyone. Whether or not that should be a federal law, I think that these things should be decided at the state level. When our country was founded, we said that most criminal justice and most civil action would be performed at the local level. The federal government didn't have anything to do with it. So I don't think the federal government should weigh in on things like this.
Right. Gayness should be private to prevent problems at work, but heterosexuality at work is fine. And that's the exact problem with this position that Rand Paul has developed. Sometimes when politicians talk, it's useful to separate what they say from how they say it. And what Rand Paul is saying when he's asked whether an employee should be able to sue if they're fired for being gay, which they can do in states that have sexual orientation protections, is Rand Paul says, I don't think anybody should be fired for being gay, should being the important word. I don't think personal lives should be part of hiring or firing, but all of this should be decided at the state level. So he's saying he doesn't think anyone should be fired for being gay, but he's fine with states deciding that it's okay to fire people for being gay. That's what he is saying here, Lewis.
And by saying that, he's saying that he thinks it's okay that if a business wants to fire someone for being gay, if their state has allowed for it to happen, that is also okay. And this is all part of, his, I guess what you would call extreme libertarian point of view, right?
And the entire point here, Lewis, is that the states most likely to not protect LGBT workers from employment discrimination are exactly the states where LGBT people are most likely to be discriminated against. And it's sort of ironic to me that the same people who oppose affirmative action on the basis that, quote, the most qualified people should be hired are the same ones who don't mind firing people because they're gay or from any group that they don't like, regardless of how qualified they are.
Yeah, I think, no one in the Republican Party should be winning the votes of anyone in the LGBT community. It's just completely insane. You would think that Rand Paul, might have been one of the more reasonable guys when it comes to this type of thing.
And on many issues, he still is.
Yeah, that's true. We agree with him on many issues, but he just, let's be honest, he doesn't stand a chance anyway.
Yeah, he has absolutely no chance. It's not clear where he's polling now. I think maybe he got a little bump at the last debate, but it's not going anywhere. And it's sad because some of the more reasonable candidates on the Republican side in total are the ones doing the worst, and that's really scary. Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. We'll take a quick break. Back with Spencer Chumbley after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Spencer Chumbley, who is a Washington, D.C. based journalist and filmmaker. His work has been featured by many media outlets, including Vice. Today we're going to talk about a pipeline known as Line 5, which is actually the subject of a new documentary produced by Motherboard and Vice. Talk to us about Line 5. Let's start there. What is it? Where is it? And importantly, how much fresh water is potentially endangered by this pipeline?
So Line 5 is a section of Enbridge's Lakehead system, which is a network of pipelines that runs through the Midwest region. To kind of take you back, Enbridge is a Canadian oil company. They're a multinational oil company that operates worldwide, but most specifically in Canada and the United States. So the Lakehead system is a pipeline system built. Most of it was built in the 1950s. That kind of spiderwebs its way through the Great Lakes region, mostly in Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota. So Line 5 is a section of this pipeline that's kind of come under scrutiny in the last couple of years because it actually runs underneath the Great Lakes. The section that it runs underneath the Great Lakes of is technically known as the Straits of Mackinac, which is the small portion between Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. It's about 5 miles wide and actually extremely, extremely deep. So Line 5 is that specific section running from Superior, Wisconsin, all the way down into kind of the lower peninsula of Michigan, and then crossing this large water boundary at the Straits of Mackinac.
What in particular about Line 5 is leading some to call it a sort of ticking time bomb? What differentiates it from any other pipeline? I
mean, there isn't so much that actually differentiates it from, except this one specific characteristic that is it's old and it's beneath the Great Lakes. You look countrywide in the United States, a lot of the infrastructure that was built, pipeline infrastructure that was built in the United States was built in the 1950s and 60s. And so what you have here is kind of a perfect coalescence of problems or issues that focus on Line 5 or that's brought Line 5 into the attention is because not only was it built in 1953, making it over 60 years old, it's actually in an extremely sensitive freshwater environment in the Great Lakes. And so people kind of, once they found out about it, and the reason that they found out about Line 5 was that the fact that Enbridge had a major oil spill in 2010 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was the largest inland oil spill in American history and leaked about over 1 million gallons into the Kalamazoo River. So while the rest of the world was pretty much fixated on the BP Deepwater Horizon spill, Enbridge kind of snuck underneath the radar with this large inland oil spill. And so afterwards, activists and concerned environmentalists started to kind of look what else is in our state, what else is in Michigan. And when they started tracing the lines back up north through Kalamazoo, they saw this pipeline. And so what they discovered is a 60-year-old pipeline, over 200 feet underwater and run by one of the worst, run by one of the companies with the worst environmental record and was responsible for the largest inland oil spill in American history.
Yeah, and I want to get to the sort of background on Enbridge that you're alluding to, but before we do that, talk a little bit about, in a number of write-ups about Line 5, I've seen the statistic presented that this pipeline, if it were to rupture or spill, could threaten 20% of the world's fresh surface water. Where does that number come from? Is that an accurate number? Help us to understand that.
Well, so the idea is that it's a twin pipeline. So Line 5 is a 30-inch pipeline that runs along from Superior, Wisconsin, through northern Wisconsin, and then kind of starts to skim the coast of Lake Michigan until it crosses in the Straits of Mackinac. And then at that point, it splits into two 20-inch pipelines. Each of these pipelines is that Enbridge has newly installed two automatic shutoff valves on either sides of the straits. But if one of those pipelines was still to rupture, each of those pipelines underneath the straits carries 1.5 million gallons of oil. So in a worst case scenario, not if one of them broke, you're looking at a 1.5 million gallon oil release. And then if two of them broke, you're looking at a 3 million gallon oil release.
When Enbridge has been asked about this and more generally about the safety of what they're doing, they say our pipelines are safe. Then you look at the sort of record on oil spills for Enbridge, and you see that between 1999 and 2000, there have been more than 800 spills. At face value, you say, that's insane, 800 spills. Now, could the devil's advocate argument be, yeah, but if you consider the amount spilled relative to the amount that has been moved through these pipelines, it's actually a really pretty good record. It's just that when you have such a big network and you're transporting so much oil, you're going to spill some. How can we make sense of either of those arguments when a sort of layman hears 800 spills?
I mean, it really depends on what you value. I've kind of made the argument in the film that we're speaking about that, or I asked the question, is this the cost of doing business for pipeline companies?
Sure.
Enbridge is going to make the assurance that no oil spill is acceptable to them. I would argue that for any oil company or oil transport company, this is factored in. They carry insurance policies to offset the cost of such disasters. And if you look at the history of the operation of this industry over the last 50 years, these pipelines leak. I mean, there's no question about it. The converse answer to your question from I think from an activist standpoint is that no oil release in the Great Lakes is acceptable. When you're talking about the economic value of one of the largest freshwater systems in the world, if not the largest, what's at stake if any leak actually occurs in the Great Lakes? And that's really what this comes down to is, yes, it seems that oil companies, maybe they do if it's a 99% success rate. But what if that 1% is actually quite large and it's affecting an extremely sensitive freshwater ecosystem? I mean, especially in the state that the United States is in at the moment, where you've got wildfires and extreme drought on the West Coast. What does it say about the Midwest that there's not enough defense or care being given to one of our greatest freshwater resources in the United States?
Oftentimes when we talk about infrastructure in the U.S., people are thinking of bridges and tunnels and roads, etc. But here we're really talking about energy infrastructure. And I'm curious what you know about what the law says about the upkeep and renovation and modernization of this type of pipeline.
Basically, I mean, the portion of the federal government that regulates pipelines is called PHMSA, or the Pipelines and Hazardous Material Safety Agency. There are no risk parameters set by the federal agency to decide when these pipelines need to be replaced, what level of risk they can be operated at, etc. In an emergency, what to do. So realistically, you have a federal agency that does pretty much nothing. And even a couple years ago, its head at the time made the comment that the regulatory process is basically dying. I mean, that's a direct quote. So you have a federal agency that has really no regulatory teeth. It's left up to the individual pipeline operators to make this decision of what's acceptable. And that's really the problem is kind of this lack of transparency. And that's what people have been fighting for in Michigan is that, we have a right to know. Our economy and our livelihoods are extremely tied up into the health of these lakes. They are freshwater oceans. And I think that's what people on the coast of the United States don't understand. And we need to be able to set these thresholds of risk, not the company, and especially not a company that is responsible for the largest inland oil spill in American history. And to talk a little bit more about that specific oil spill, there were known anomalies in line 6B. There were known fractures and things that should have been inspected and should have been rectified. But they kept kind of operating the pipeline at normal capacity and not addressing them. And the federal government was nowhere to be found.
It seems like another one of these cases where those who are against regulation in a number of industries will take an incident that happens and point to the regulating agency and say, see, regulation didn't work. And it's such a counterproductive argument, because in so many of these cases, what we find out is that the problem was not that the agency exists, but wasn't able to regulate properly. It's that it doesn't actually have the power to do enough regulation. In other words, they argue that this is evidence that for needing less regulation, when the reality is it's evidence that we need more.
I mean, I think it's not a dichotomy of kind of an esoteric conversation of the regulation of industry or the regulation of commerce in America. It's the idea that there is no safety management of this type of infrastructure that's adequate to prevent massive environmental destruction.
We've been speaking with Spencer Chumbley. He's a Washington, D.C. based journalist and filmmaker. Thank you so much for talking to us about this.
Thanks for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson, who is essentially in a tie for first place with lunatic Donald Trump, has suspended his campaign to go and sell some books. As Igor Bobik wrote in Huffington Post, Senator John McCain suspended his presidential campaign for a financial crisis. Neurosurgeon Ben Carson is doing so for a book tour. According to ABC News, Ben Carson is putting his public campaign events on hold to focus on private fundraising and stops to promote his new book, A More Perfect Union. He's going to be doing all sorts of book signings. His last public event was on October 2nd. His next public event will not be until the Republican debate in Colorado on October 28th. Usually when you suspend your campaign, you're withdrawing from the race, but still trying to rake in the money. This is unique in that it's a guy who's tied for first place right now, Lewis, saying, you know what? I think I'm going to take nearly a month off to just go sell books. It can be pretty lucrative to run for president.
I think it's a terrible decision, of course, right? I mean, when you're in the lead, you have to try and, well, maybe almost in the lead, you have to try and keep that momentum going. You have to be more proactive, and I just don't get this. I don't see the point.
Do you think that Ben Carson knows he's not going to be the Republican candidate, and instead he's saying, you know, my efforts are better placed into what the Republican Party is really all about, which is selling books and doing speaking tours?
That could be it. This is going to do wonders for him in that realm, of course. So maybe he is just saying to himself, hey, I'm just going to let this run its course, and that I'm going to be even more of a conservative darling than I was before, maybe even get a sweet gig on Fox News all the time.
At least he's not doing yet what Mike Huckabee has done, which is selling his mailing list to advertisers that offer quack cures for cancer and diabetes. Ben Carson hasn't done that yet, although I do wonder if he's going to scare people into buying his book by talking about the Holocaust again, right? President Obama's administration is like the Nazis, or the gun control was responsible for the Holocaust. That's a good way to sell books.
Yeah, I mean, Huckabee's completely shameless, but I don't think Carson has reached that level quite yet. I will not be buying his book, David.
Pharmaceutical CEO Martin Shkreli, who became well known a few weeks ago when he raised the price of the drug Daraprim by somewhere between 4,000 and 5,500%, says he tried to donate to presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. Why would he do that when they're on opposite sides of the issue of drug pricing? Well, Bernie Sanders was bashing Big Pharma on the campaign trail. Martin Shkreli decided to donate $2,700 to Bernie Sanders to try to get a meeting with Sanders so the two could talk about pharmaceutical pricing. However, the Bernie Sanders campaign is not doing it. Campaign spokesman Michael Briggs said, not only is Bernie Sanders not going to meet with Martin Shkreli, we're not keeping the money. We've redonated the money to Whitman Walker, which is a health clinic in Washington, "We are not keeping the money from this poster boy for drug company greed." And the interesting thing is, Shkreli said he donated with the hopes of getting Bernie Sanders' attention and getting a meeting with him. And now he's, quote, furious that Bernie Sanders is using him as a punching bag. And then, Lewis, he went on a weird Twitter tirade, Martin Shkreli did, where he posted first, "So angry at Bernie Sanders, I could punch a wall." And then shortly thereafter posted, "Does anyone know how to treat a wrist fracture without going to a hospital?" And then a few hours after that, Lewis posted a picture of an x-ray that appears to show a fractured wrist. What a drama queen, Lewis, that he didn't get what he wanted, apparently, from Bernie Sanders. And he claims to have punched a wall and broken his wrist over the anger. But maybe the entire thing is a joke. I don't know.
Maybe, but he's if it's real, and he's trying to, through his interviews, make us seem like he's a reasonable, level-headed guy.
Right.
This doesn't help. I applaud Bernie for this, and I kind of wish they did have that meeting, and I wish it were televised, because I really would have loved to hear that.
He also said, Shkreli did, that he could see himself supporting Jeb Bush, who he says seems reasonable. He's not impressed by, quote, spoiled brat Donald Trump. He doesn't like Hillary Clinton. The Martin Shkreli story has been so enlightening for so many reasons now. We first talked about how the Martin Shkreli story exposed the systemic problems with a healthcare for-profit system. That was useful in terms of what we learned from Martin Shkreli. He's now exposing the problem of campaign finance. He donated the maximum allowed, hoping to get a private meeting with Bernie Sanders. That's the problem with political donations, that they are made in order to access the politicians and try to gain influence. So without even realizing, maybe, Lewis, the fact that he said, "I donated to try to get a meeting with Bernie Sanders," that's the problem with our campaign finance system.
Yeah, of course. Now, there are any number of changes we need to make to our system. It's not just the finances. That's a part of it, of course. But yes, he has been a wonderful instrument in bringing all of these things to light. But, Dave, has he lowered the price of that drug yet?
I haven't heard that he has, no. And he also made an interesting comment about something else that's important, which is Shkreli said, "I would ask Bernie Sanders, what role does innovation play in healthcare? Is he willing to sort of accept that there is a trade-off, that to take risks for innovation, companies have to invest lots of money and they need a return?" This is the idea that innovation happens in a total vacuum from the commons and the government and public society. Innovation at private companies happens on the shoulders of employees who likely at some point went to public schools, built on research done at public institutions funded by the government, in labs that use utilities like water, which is kept clean by the FDA and administered by local municipalities, in a country where our system of laws put in place and enforced by the judicial system and police departments makes it so people can sit in labs and do pharmaceutical research. That's the reality.
Innovation is still happening in countries that have universal health care,
right,
and single payer systems. I guess we could get into discussions. Well, they're still, striking up deals with other countries when it comes to medication and innovations and patents and this and that. But, innovation still happens there. So I think it can happen here under the same conditions.
We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting voicemail about Columbus Day. Take a listen.
Hey there, Pac-Man. Quick question for you. Well, actually, it's not. I just want to congratulate all yourself and all these other liberal networks for coming out so hard against Columbus Day.
Right.
Saying how he's an evil white guy, how we shouldn't celebrate Columbus Day. That's really, really good stuff y'all did there. Real good history lesson. Having said all that, Pac-Man, I was just curious what you did on your day off on Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah, what'd you do for that little 72 weekend you got there?
Yep. Well, before trying to troll us about Columbus Day and some sort of hypocrisy you want to point out, You might have wanted to check if we did a show on Columbus Day, because our day off didn't exist, Lewis. We did a show on Columbus Day. So the troll failing miserably.
I've heard this guy before. I know he's called multiple times.
Yeah.
And it's not even funny when someone who isn't clever is trying to be really clever. It's just cringeworthy and sad. Do 2 seconds of research next time before leaving a voicemail.
219-2-DAVID-P. If you have anything to say to us, please call 24 hours a day. On the bonus show today, all the stories from my trip to Las Vegas last week, plus a shocking Ebola revelation and some opinions about bad headlines and reality TV that I think you will enjoy. DavidPakman.com/membership. And remember, Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern, email blast going out with a huge membership discount offer. Sign up for our mailing list at DavidPakman.com to be notified about that.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.